welcome back to another episode of I'm a Software Engineer. What next? Matt, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, James, as usual.
Have you got any special t-shirts on today that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, well, I run out of video game t-shirts, and so now I'm going to math nerd t-shirts. And this one is appropriate because it was my birthday yesterday and I ate all the cake instead of pie, but there you go.
What does it say? What does it say?
It says I ate all the pie.
Right. Yeah. See, I don't think if I walk past you in the street, I'd get that straight away, but
it's very, very bad. I know our children of middle-aged male parents everywhere are cringing at the dad jokiness of that right now.
Yeah. Have you ever had anyone actually recognize it in public? No.
I don't wear. I really wouldn't wear it out of the house, I don't think.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you wore it today.
On a maths-related note, though, I went to pub trivia last night, and at the end of pub trivia, they do this this higher-lower thing with a deck of cards, and I got 11 higher or lowers in a row right and won the jackpot and won £52.
Congrats. Really? Nice.
Yep. Yeah.
Actual cash, or did you get a voucher to spend?
It was actual cash. They had a cash in a tin they were going to give me at the end. Anyway,
wow.
So I thought
a nice birthday prep.
It was the universe smiling on me. But I thought the odds were really long. Like I thought it was kind of 1 in 20 million or something. I did a rough calculation, but it's actually only 1 in about 20 because of the way it works, right? Obviously, you do like once you take a card out, you've got fewer cards, so you know what's not there. It was a roughly 1 in 20 chance, I think. But when I did the calculation and thought it through, but it's still
well done.
Hey,
not prompting you to go and get a lottery ticket.
Paid for dinner. Yeah. Well, now I paid for dinner.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, so today we are joined by someone who started in UX and interactive design, went on to co-found BorrowMyDoggy, led 21 engineers across sports data at IMG Arena, and is now CTO and at Practice Toolkit, building software for GPs inside the NHS. Les, really glad to have you on the pod.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here. Sure. Actually, it's great that you started with the UX thing because some days I forget about that. It's a long time ago. I started my career actually in hardware and networks and doing IT support, second and third line. And then about 2000, I switched and decided to go to uni and study media, what was called interactive media production. And I went straight into working in e-commerce straight after that. Worked on user experience before it was called UX back in the old days, and then really found my love of coding and building stuff for the front end. Transitioned more into doing more front end development. Went through a number of really interesting roles doing that, bit of contract work. And then I started understanding a bit more about the full stack and really got my teeth into that. That's when I ended up building BorrowMyDoggy, as you mentioned. And that was a lot of fun. And we had a lot of challenges and pretty fast scaling company right at the zeitgeist of the sharing economy. And then when I left there, I went back to contracting and then carried on doing more full stack stuff. And after a while, sort of decided that, I wanted to own a bit more of the product I was building. I felt that contracting was a bit more sort of mercenary up for hire type work. I naturally gravitated towards leading the teams I was contracting on. And so I started to look more into management and made a shift into perm just before COVID hit, actually, perfect timing. And then kind of became a leader more than a developer at times, but then have sort of oscillated between the two over the last 6 or 7 years, really focusing more on remote teams and hybrid teams and trying to help people who are really far apart from each other still work together as a team.
I really want to know. Sorry, James. Sorry.
We're probably going to ask the same question. Is it about BorrowMyDoggy?
It is exactly about BorrowMyDoggy. Yeah. I want the elevator pitch. I want the elevator pitch for BorrowMyDoggy.
The elevator pitch for BorrowMyDoggy. Okay.
Yeah. Product.
So the product is, there are an incredible amount of people out there that either have a dog and need extra help or are at risk of having to get rid of the dog because they can't look after it well enough.
Yep.
And on the other side of that, there are lots of people out there who love to have dogs, but can't for whatever reason. Maybe they've got a partner that's allergic, or they're living in an apartment where they can't have a dog full time, or they just simply can't afford the care and upkeep of an animal. And so BorrowMyDoggy connects those people. So it's a subscription platform where owners can subscribe and put their dogs on the platform. It's a bit like doggy dating, basically. So the owners put the dog up on the platform, and then borrowers come along and say, hey, I'd like to look after your dog for you. And then it's non-transactional, so there's no money. So both.
There's no money. Interesting.
The transaction is a subscription. So the owners think, I don't know what it costs now, but it was £45 a year. The borrowers paid £12 a year, which is like £1 a month, which is nothing.
Yep.
And that gave them third-party liability insurance, a 24/7 vet line. So if there's any time they're looking after a dog, they need extra help, they can call. And we added a few other things as well. There are a couple of other perks that we tried to add on as well. But it's a pretty good deal, actually. I think financially for everybody, it was awesome.
Yeah, because pet minding is very expensive.
Oh, it is. And it was right at the time where there was lots of other companies starting to try and do the paid model. Dog Vacay, I think, in the US became Rover, I think. I got it all the other way around, and that went huge. They sold for millions and millions. And yeah, we were doing it because everybody loves dogs. It was great fun.
Did you end up exiting that? Because it sounds like it might be still going now, is it?
It's still going. My co-founder's running it. Yeah, I think we kind of got to a place where we wanted to run the business in different ways. It was her idea. I knew that I could move on and do lots of other technical stuff other places, and I was really proud of what we'd built. And I think it was just the logical time. We built a really great team. I left when we brought on a really amazing head of product and stepped away from the business. I'm still interested in it. I still got shares in it. I didn't fully exit, but it's awesome to see how well it's done. It's in the press still every other day. It's still really helping. I think during COVID, it made a real difference to people who were either stuck at home, not being able to do anything, and people who were like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about the dog? How do we look after it? And lots of people bought dogs during the COVID because they were at home all the time. And then after everybody started to go back to the office, they're like, oh man, what do we do now? And I think it really helped there as well.
There's got to be some welfare benefits for the animals as well. I mean, if the alternative is the dog's locked up in the house, or someone comes and takes it for a walk or spends some time with it, that's got to be the upside for the animal too, I would imagine.
Well, dogs are inherently social animals, right? They thrive off contact with humans, and it's unconditional love when there's humans around. They're very happy to meet new humans, most of them. Very happy to meet new humans and spend time with them. So yeah, some of the stories from back then, which is 13 years ago, there's still people who are still borrowing dogs from people that they bet puppies, and they're still looking after them as adult dogs,
They've become regular borrowers.
Yeah,
of the same dog.
just totally. Yeah, they just, they had people we had people ended up looking after people's houses to look after the dogs and stuff as well.
Yeah. It's a great story.
Did you jump straight into? Sorry, just before you move on from BorrowMyDoggy, were you doing anything else on the side then? Was that a full-time project?
Yeah, so when I started, I was contracting at RBS. I was building clearing platforms for banks, and I met my co-founder at a Lean Startup Machine event, and she sort of presented the idea at the beginning of the weekend. I was like, that sounds like a fun thing to spend my weekend validating. So we did. We got out of the building and went and met people in Hampstead Heath and talked to them about their dogs and how they got care and stuff. We stuck some posters up. And by the end of the weekend, I think we had like our people signed up to the site, like landing page that we'd put out. And then one of them was in Exeter. Like we stuck a poster in Hampstead Heath and somebody in Exeter signed up within 24 hours. And we kind of went, yeah, I think we've got an idea here. And we won the weekend because it's all about people validating their ideas, and we did the best at doing that. And then before we knew it, we'd been mentioned in a newsletter called emeraldstreet.com, and it just went bonkers from then. I think we had 4,500 signups in an hour to a landing page.
Wow.
We didn't even have an app at the time. And then it just grew from there. It was great.
Incredible. So then you went right full time into this. And
yeah, so we got so that was probably, it was about 6 or 7 months of working in my evenings and weekends, and then we got in some angel investment, and it meant that I was able to go full time. It was a very significant moment walking out of RBS in Broadgate in the City of London that day and going, I'm working on my own now. Well, I'm working in my own company. It was me and my co-founder, and it was like, right, this is real. This is going to happen.
Was that a hard choice?
I don't think so.
I guess you had the angel investment, so you must have felt some security that you could survive for a while.
Like that, I was a contractor, and I knew that like at that time the contractor market was ridiculously buoyant. I knew that if it went against the wall, I would be able to find a job pretty quickly. But also I was super excited. Like the feedback we'd had off people, like the amount of press engagement. We were on Radio 4 the day we launched the actual web app, the Today program. We were in like the Mail, the Sun, the Mirror, like every national newspaper features us over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks. So we grew really, really fast, even before it was a proper viable product. Like when the first version I built, you could sign up and create a profile, but there was no searching system. I hadn't put the Postgres GIS module in yet. And so when you landed on the search page, it went, oh, there's no one in your area. Why don't you share on Twitter or Facebook and tell people about us, and there'll be more people soon. When actually I knew full well that in a lot of areas there were hundreds of dogs and borrowers that were ready to go. We needed to be ready. It all just happened so very quickly that we had to sort of iterate very fast. I think I released the actual search about 3 or 4 weeks later. And this is still all before I went full time. So we'd actually launched and were taking revenue before I went full time on it.
Well, it's the dream story of every 0 to 1 startup. And I commend you on get the order right. Like going and talking to customers first is the thing that you really should be doing. Let's change tack ever so slightly before we get too far down the track. I'm interested to pose you a standard question that we ask all our guests, which is, imagine that you had a magic telephone that you could make a phone call to your 25-year-old self. And knowing what you know now, after, I'm sure we're going to learn about a few things in a second, but after that journey, particularly the startup there and leaving a big job and all of these things, you've done all these career transitions, some advice that you might give down that magic phone to your 25-year-old self?
Good question. Really, I love this question. I've watched a couple of your other podcasts and I love seeing other people's answers as well. I think my 25-year-old self probably needed to hear that it's more about the people than about what I can do myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think if I could go back and say, there's some things you should go focus on. One of those things is go find really great teams to work in.
Mm-hmm.
Go find those teams. Go look for people who are working really well together and talk about what they do and feed off that and learn as much as you can from those people, and don't just keep very narrow focus. Because for a long while I was like, no, I just do design. I don't want to be considered a developer. You know, I care about that. And then when I became a front-end developer, I was like, oh, I'm just a coder. I'm not really a developer. And it took me a really long time to realize that actually I was missing out opportunities when I was working with people to actually understand what they did and how to be better at it. Yeah, I think that's probably the main one. And quality is another one as well. Look out for quality. I think I worked in a few roles where I've put up with a lot of grief because it wasn't a consensus of quality in the team. Like, it was just a lot of people just doing their thing. They were just getting by. And
what does quality mean in that? What do you mean by quality? You mean the people's attention to detail, or what? Let me put words in your mouth. Sorry, you tell me what you think. What does quality mean?
No, that's a good part. So, yeah, I think quality, part of it is attention to detail. 2 is really caring about what you're doing and not just doing a job. You actually really care about the thing you're delivering. But also accountability and sort of bringing each other up. Like, how do you find people that are actually really encouraging you instead of saying, oh, well, you're not very good at that. You know, I've worked in a few, I think it used to be a thing in development teams where it was very much a case of, it was almost like everybody was two-shedding each other every week. I don't know if you know what two-shedding is, but this concept that, you know, you work with people, you come in on a Monday and you go, what'd you do this weekend? I painted the shed. And then they'll reply, oh, well, I painted 2 sheds. You know, it's like, it was that competitive
one-upping.
One-upping, basically. That's probably a better way of saying it.
Yeah, that's what we say in Australia, one-upping, yeah.
Right, but I think quite a lot of, there's a natural part of engineering used to be, I don't know if it still is in teams that are working really close to each other, but it used to be very much about, oh, I can do this better than you. It didn't used to, like, I've worked on a few teams where it wasn't about, how can I help you do this better? And the best teams I've worked on are people who are like, yeah, everybody's got fallibility, and the best people are the ones that notice that fallibility and go, hey, can I help you with that? Not, you're doing that wrong. Probably this is a really long answer to your question, but there's one other thing I just thought about.
No,
the other one is asking for help. My 25-year-old self was rubbish at asking for help. I thought I had to know everything and I had to be responsible for everything. And a couple of situations over the years where I regret not saying, I need some help here, and things would have been very different.
Do you know what? I have some very direct and usable feedback on this point, right? Because a lot of people say this, and a lot of the reverse is true as well. A lot of managers or leaders will say, if only you'd come and ask me for help, right? Like you see this a lot, right? And one of the the little sort of secret unlocks there is that one of the ways to get over the fear of asking for help, and one of the ways to avoid being dismissed when you're asking for help, is not to go, I need help. The secret pathway through this is, I tried this thing and it failed in this way and I don't understand why. Can you help me?
Yeah, that's a really great tip.
And Yeah, and that is the last thing you want as a manager is someone just putting their hand up going, I don't know what's wrong, right? Because it's completely like you have to context switch, right? But if someone comes to you, and you know, I'm sure you know yourself, someone comes to you and goes, look, I was doing this thing and I tried this and that didn't work, and I tried that, and I think maybe my mental model of this isn't quite right because I can't now, you know, I'm stuck. I mean, I can't reason about this anymore. All of a sudden, you're just like, right, I'm so engaged with you now because now you're thinking about it, and we can, you know, I can impart some knowledge. I feel good that maybe I'm able to help you. You've learned something. You've learned what not to do. Right? It's a real sort of hack to get through that. But the other thing, I want to just pick up on something you said, which I'm a huge fan of, which is the people. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that if you intentionally go looking for good people first and foremost, right? You often find, more often than not, that good people are doing good work, or even the good people are doing the best work. And so if you can be near good people, you'll end up doing the best work. And guess what? The people doing the best work get paid the best.
Yeah.
And so
I look back on the teams that I worked on. There was a time where I worked at a company called Forward Internet Group, which owned USwitch and a few other startups and stuff like that. I worked with a couple of the senior guys there, and I was sort of doing the front end and they were the back end guys. And there was a lot of developer freedom, and they were ex-ThoughtWorkers. They'd worked at ThoughtWorks and they were really, really good guys. Yeah, one of them is now the CTO of Love Holidays, Mike Jones. Mm-hmm. If you get a chance to read any of his stuff, he is one of the best writers at the moment, I think, on technology. And another guy who worked with him as well was a guy called Paul Ingalls, who's still the CTO of USwitch, or wasn't the CTO then, but is now. And working with those guys, like there was something about working with them that was super special. Like it was, it's like working with people who are really, so Paul Ingalls.
Did you know when you met these people that these are the people I want to work for? How do you go find those people?
It was kind of a funny connection. So I worked on a contract with a bunch of thought workers at Money Supermarket up in North Wales. And when I went back to contracting, it was when I first started contracting actually. And I worked with a set of guys and girls from ThoughtWorks that were just awesome. They were really lovely people and really knowledgeable. And it was like a real exchange of knowledge every day. You know, it was really good to work with them. One of them then joined Forward, a guy called Antonio Terreno. I'm going to say his name wrong. And he told me when I moved back down to London, he was like, hey, I think you'd really love working with these guys. Come and meet them for a coffee. And I did. And we, you know, hit it off. And I ended up going, I've got to be careful how I say this. I went back to Forward. So I worked for Forward several times, and I just had a really great time working on that. That's probably one of the best contracts I had. And to see those guys go on and grow their careers and become really, really awesome at what they do.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's a real show of, you know, if you let developers do what they do best, they start looking for the optimizations and things like leadership and management and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I read everything Mike writes at the moment. You know, it's quite fun to know that, you know, I knew him 15 years ago, but we still occasionally chat.
Before he was famous.
Yeah.
Before he was famous. But so it's very good advice. And I agree completely with ThoughtWorks. Certainly the early days of ThoughtWorks, I haven't had much to do with them in the last years or so, but the early days of ThoughtWorks, they were when we were building Digital Ventures up, anyone from ThoughtWorks was had a foot in the door, or, you know, immediately. They were almost dead cert hires because they had a fantastic bunch of people there for sure.
They still do today. Like generally, their engineers are pretty solid, so it's obviously carried on.
Yeah. I mean, it's they had a fantastic culture from the word go.
Yeah, they have a real scheme, or they used to. They probably still do this, but when you first join them, they would send you over to their ThoughtWorks University in India, and you'd spend a certain number of weeks or months literally purely studying the ThoughtWorks way of doing things. And it was all about learning and brown bag sessions and working at Forward. It was very much a case of like they kind of carried the candle. Is that the right phrase? Forward and made it like a really great environment for engineers to excel.
As you mentioned before that when I talked about you starting out as a UX, why did you move into software engineering? If I know it's related, but what made you sort of go down that path?
I'm very interested. Before you answer, I want to prime this because I'm very interested in this as well. Because to me, this feels like going the other way, right? Much more often than not, you would see someone start out in software engineering and end up maybe in design or product management. Like you'd sort of go the other way. But to come from design into software engineering, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone doing that. So I'm very curious to hear what prompted that and how that came about.
Well, I think got to be careful not going too far back with this one, but GeoCities.
Oh yeah, you are showing your age now.
Yeah, I know. GeoCities in the mid to late 90s. I played a lot around with HTML, and I remember getting a copy of a copy of Photoshop. This is before we even had layers in Photoshop. It was that old.
Yeah, well.
And I remember getting really excited about what I could do graphically in Photoshop that I couldn't yet do with HTML. And I think I kind of drifted a little bit away from building stuff and just focusing on what it looked like. And then when I got the opportunity to go to uni, it was called New Media Production when I first started the course. It was that long ago. It was all about making really great products that looked great. And a lot of the focus was all about what did it look like and how did it work, rather than what was the technology underneath. We did a bit of tech, a bit of Flash Action Script and director lingo and all that sort of stuff. But it was all really like, what did it look like? And some of the products people built on their course were really great. So when I went into wanting to work in London, I was like, well, I can do a bit of code. I can do the HTML and CSS bit, and I know that well enough, but I also understand the design bit. And so I want to try and focus on that. And I worked for an agency where they didn't really have that skill set, and they were working with some really big high street brands. We did Toys R Us, we did Majestic's Wine's first e-commerce store. We've refreshed theirs. We did like the first store for TM Lewin and people like that. Long Tall Sally used to be a customer, Links of London, lots of like e-commerce well-known brands. And the UX at the time wasn't really thought of, like people really didn't care about it that much. It was all about like revenue. And if you looked at the e-commerce sites back then, they were all hard to work on. Like we worked on the Halfords redesign for Halfords, and we led the UX on that, and did all the interviews for customers and stuff. Like one of the forms took like most customers 3 attempts to fill in because it was so complicated just to try and buy something. So I loved all that bit. But then I started realizing I had more agency if I built stuff. So if I could turn my designs into something, I could do more with it. And then I got all excited about accessibility because it was around the time when web standards were a huge thing. And I thought, wow, I can make things look good and work for everybody. And then it sort of got me excited about the tech again. And then I just naturally gravitated further over there.
I think this is the second bit of choice advice on today's chat, because I think interesting things often happen on the boundary, right? And I think when you look at kind of the idea of multidisciplinarity, if that's a word, right, effectively combining disciplines, like combining the learnings and insights from one discipline with another, like you've done here, that the insights of one with the other. When that happens, magic happens, right? Like really, really interesting stuff happens when that happens. So I'm a big advocate for not just multidisciplinary teaming, but for trying to straddle a couple of domains. We used to have this idea of majors and minors. So, as a software engineer in the engineering team, you would have a major, and it might be, you might be backend, you might be a database performance person, and you're the go-to person for that. But you need a minor as well, at least one minor where you go and you're able to range into something else. And so I much prefer that thinking framing than full stack. Full stack is often thrown around as an excuse for fewer programmers by people who don't really understand what's going on. But I prefer major, minor, one definite major and maybe 1 or 2 minors to keep your creative juices flowing by being exposed to different things.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it's about what you want to do as well. I think some people love doing the tinkering and like writing languages and writing frameworks, and that's the hardcore engineering part of the world we live in. And then there's people like me who are like more interested in what can I build that someone can do something with? Like what's the product I can build? I suppose languages and frameworks are a product of their own sense, but the stuff that excited me was the boundaries of, well, if I want to be able to make this thing for someone to use, what are the bits of information I don't have now? What are the bits of knowledge? Like the first time I built a full stack app in Rails when it was in beta was because I started work at a corporate marketing agency, and they were transferring these massive files about by email. And it was horrible because people were trying to keep track of like amends and approvals and all that sort of stuff. And I started work there, and I was like, they had this like weird FTP site that they were doing it with. And I was like, right, I'm just going to rebuild that. I'm just going to build a flow. And it took me like probably a few weeks, but I built an app in Rails that did everything. And I learned so much about databases. I learned about schemas. I learned about migrations. I learned all the backend stuff I'd never touched before.
It's funny you mentioned that use case, because that's actually where Rails comes from, right? Rails comes from Base 20. They call Basecamp. Yeah, I was going to say Base 24. Something completely different. They they built Rails for that to build Basecamp, right? And it's kind of it's very good for that use case.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's what I built BorrowMyDoggy in as well, because I knew it.
I spent years writing Rails as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gutted I sort of stepped away from it when I went corporate and started doing stuff in Java and C# and eventually Node and TypeScript, because Rails was a really great community as well. I think when you worked in Rails, you got to know people in that community. And
it's joyful. It was joyful. I mean, it had its challenges, but it was joyful. It was really fun, really good fun to program in Rails. Really good fun. Yeah. James?
Les, you were I think it was when you finished contracting, you went into a perm role with Augent, is the company? Audigent. And you were a product engineer, but, product engineer in my eyes it's probably always existed, but the title is more common over the last like 2 or 3 years. And you started there back in 2019. Was that what you were called back then, a product engineer? Or is that something you've sort of used in your profile now because it's more common?
No, that was
just
on my
curious.
job, on my contract. Product engineer was the title they had to come up with because they didn't know what to call somebody who did the design, the UX, the front end and the back end of a particular set of products.
You're a trailblazer, because I think this, quite honestly, but James, you're probably closer to this than me, but I hadn't heard the term product engineer used up until maybe the last 2 years, maybe even less than that, as a term. I mean, we had product managers and we had engineers and we had I don't know, we had different flavors of
full
engineer,
stack engineers or whatever.
Exactly.
That's
I don't remember hearing product engineer. So what does it mean, Les, for the viewer? What's a product engineer?
To me, I think it's somebody who cares about the product, not just what they're building, not just the actual tech of what they're building, but it's somebody who's got a bit of a product sense. So they're like, okay, how's the person going to use this? If I build this feature, what's the simplest way it could work for a user and help them solve their problem or solve their goal? I think for a long time, you were talking about this idea of majors and minors. I think a lot of people became very, the classic T-shaped, where you end up with this one skill in this one area. And I think what a product engineer is it's almost like a sine wave squared off. What's the squared off sine wave called? I can't remember, but you end up with, you're not quite as tall as necessarily as a
sawtooth.
Sawtooth wave. That's it. You're more, you've got a broader sense of skills so that people can come to you and say, hey, I've got this idea for a product. How do we build it? You're not going, oh, well, I can only do the HTML and CSS, or I can do the JavaScript, but not the back end,
I'm trying to kill T-shape. I don't like it as an idea, but let me build on your idea, because I think it's something similar. I much prefer what Kent Beck called paint trip people. And so, just metaphorically, imagine a paintbrush, like a house paintbrush. Dip it in a pot of paint of one color and paint it along the wall, right? And the longer you sort of leave it, you get bigger drips. And so the width of the stroke is time, right? So this idea of paint trip people introduces this idea of time, whereas T-shape for me has this sort of fixed idea where you're just stuck in that one thing for all time, and I don't think that's very healthy for anyone, right? And so I much prefer this idea of paint trip people, and not my idea. Kent Beck, credit where credit's due. It's a great metaphor.
I think that the T-shaped thing also makes you, like you say, it makes people feel like when they're making a transition from one type of part of their career to another, it feels very, very heavy and like they're breaking across something rather than straying into an area they haven't touched before, And I guess that's one of the things I'm really appreciative in my career is I got the opportunity to get in and mix around with lots of different things and be curious and get in and understand why, if I change this thing, do I need to know about everybody else's impact on that, Or if somebody changes something on an API, all the consumers of that API, all the teams that are using that API need to know how that works. So what do I need to know about their teams to know how to not break their system? Sometimes I think people get too easily blinkered. I don't know. They just end up stuck in their track and they're like, well, this is what I do. I'm a Java developer. That's what I do. And they don't get the opportunity to try Kotlin or Scala or any of the other things that are like on the edges of what they do already, but could expose them to really cool stuff.
And I'll tell you what, I think this has, like in my career, which is more than 30 years now writing software, it's never been easier to kind of push the boat out and try something that you would otherwise not have touched. So I would have called myself, and in the last 18 months, an Elixir programmer, because I'm programming in Elixir, and James is going, oh God, he's talking about Elixir again. But just in the last 6 months, I've written Rust, like a substantial amount of Rust. I've written, and I say with what I've written means these days, which is I'm jockeying 3 Claude code sessions and reviewing code from an agent, right, is what coding is these days. But Rust, Swift, I've written a game for the App Store. I've written a macOS app, a native macOS app in Swift. I've written Lua. I've got a couple of things where a bunch of Lua, I've got like an Elixir run. There's a really great hosted Lua engine for Elixir, and there's also a great hosted Lua engine for Rust. So I've got this really novel architecture where I've got stuff running locally, stuff running remotely for privacy reasons, but Lua is the common language between the two on a Rust runtime and Elixir runtime. Like, I would never have even contemplated doing this before. I mean, I know enough about what I'm doing to know what to pull on, push and pull on and push against when something's going on. But honestly, I've known about Lua for years. It's one of the fundamental languages used in video game engines and stuff. I've known about it for years, but I would never have bothered to pick up a line of code, right? And now I'm all of a sudden I'm a polyglot programmer now. I'm comfortably writing across these 4 languages and loving it.
I remember the first time I came across that term, actually, polyglot. It's funny, I'm just going to end up talking about Forward again, but there was a guy at Forward called Tom Hall, I think his name was, and he had a book from Pragmatic Programmer. I don't remember those.
Yeah,
that
it's one of the great.
I'm sure you've got a bookshelf full of them.
A bookshelf there,
yeah. I remember getting the Rails book from them the first time. But he had a seven languages in 7 days book. I was like, why on earth would you need to know that? Like at the time, I was like, just getting my head around JavaScript. Why would I want to go and learn all of those other languages? And as I've got further in my career, I'm like, no, that's really, really helpful to be able to just know the paradigms that you need to work within.
Exactly.
And actually then it just becomes about syntax and knowing the idiosyncrasies of the language and what they're good for. Like trying to pick a technology when you're about to start a project becomes so much, well, in some ways it becomes easier when you know what you need it to do, but also when you've got a real sort of smorgasbord of options, it makes a real difference to what you can do with it.
But also and I think this is not an idea of mine. This is kind of a generally accepted idea. The expression of the idea is very tied up with the idea. And so, there's things you can say in German, like if you read Hegel in German and to a German native speaker, there's nuance in that doesn't come through in English translation. And if you read, I listen to an opera in Italian, someone who's an Italian speaker will tell you there's nuance in the Italian that doesn't come through in the English translation, right? So the actual expression of the idea is fundamentally caught up with the idea itself, right? And I think this is why it's so useful to go and look at a programming language and say, oh, they're doing this thing, which in this language has this really interesting expressive, you can do this thing in this language that's really hard to do in another language. Right? Like things like, I was actually having a conversation just the other day about how languages simplify down to these basic ideas. You kind of got iteration, invocation, iteration, selection, invocation is sort of one bundle. And then you've got closures, so sort of Lispy style type things. And then you've got types, right, as another tool. And then you've got kind of actor-based ideas, right? So message passing ideas, right? And all languages, we know this, like they all sort of devolve down to Turing complete. If they're Turing complete, they're kind of equivalent. But those pools of ideas that are better represented in some languages than others, right? So if you pull out BASIC, you're not doing closures in BASIC, right? Or you don't have a type system and so on, right? But it's really useful as a programmer to go and look at Lisp, right? And go, oh, hang on, code is data. Wow, okay. And I can that's really hard to do in any other language, but it's super expressive when you get down to it. Super expressive.
Yeah, I remember the first time I came across list comprehension in Python.
Oh yeah.
Blew my mind. I was like,
yeah.
You can write all of that in one line and it's actually readable and understandable.
Yeah.
And, in JavaScript, it would have been 8 or 9 lines worth of code and amazing amount of blocks, but that's a simple example.
The with structure in Elixir?
Yes, I've seen that because that came across from the guys in Ruby, didn't it? Originally.
Well, so Elixir is inspired by Ruby syntaxy wise. Like you'll feel at home if you do it, but it has this thing called I haven't seen this in any other language. I'm sure it is in other languages, but I just haven't seen it. But it's this way, when you write, like you particularly see this with async stuff in JavaScript, you get this nesting hell, right, of async stuff, and it's just it's just a disaster to read. It's impossible to read. This is I'm getting this will probably get edited out, so apologies to the 99.9% of the audience who are not Elixir programmers, right? It's just me. But you can write this code which just reads as like it reads in the sunny day path, like it just sort of reads as what's going on, and you can look at it line by line, and it's completely functional. And then errors fall out of it, and they fall out of the with block in a really predictable way. And it's just like this is gorgeous to look at. You can look at these 20 lines of code. You go, I have completely understand what's going on. And I know they've taken the Elixir syntax for with, and I think they've put that into Python. It's coming into Python at some point. So it's definitely worth having a look at the with syntax. I'd never seen it until I started programming Elixir, and it's like,
I love it when you just come across those little things that just make all the difference, right?
Yeah. It's to bring it back to user interfaces. That's a user interface design outcome, right? Someone has sat down and really thought about what's the interface that the programmer is going to use to express these ideas, and here's the way to do it, which simplifies the way that's done and exposes the meaning in a really clear and succinct way. It's very, very, very good. Sorry, nerd fest over.
Nerd out.
I've got a couple of questions that I was going to ask something about AI, but I think maybe we go towards we asked that at the end. You went from founding your startup, going back into contracting, and then before your most recent role, which is back in a startup, you were in a sort of more of was it management role at IMG Arena?
Yeah, so I started out as a lead developer.
Yeah.
And then after about a year, I shifted over leading a team of 24 people and basically manager of managers. So I then was the manager of all the
And now you've gone back to a startup. Like, did that teach you something? Did you enjoy that role? Did it make you realize what you wanted? Because you've gone back to where you were, closer to where you were back with BorrowMyDoggy.
Yeah, I think the thing about, some people have asked me about this, about moving between corporates and startups, and actually a lot of great teams in corporates I've worked in have actually behaved as startups. Like, they've thought about the minimum viable product, they've worked out how to lean test stuff, talk to customers, all of the good stuff you would do in a startup, but they've got a little bit more bankrolling from the corporate side, and then sometimes some restrictions around what they can do from a compliance point of view. But IMG I think it was an awesome opportunity and a challenge that I wanted to take on. I'd led teams before and done management before, but I hadn't done it in a proper official head of technology role. And I think because I'd been a developer there and I'd seen the problems from the ground, like when I first started, I had to get myself onboarded and try and understand what they were doing with their code bases and the products. I could see all of the different opportunities we had as a team to do things in a slightly different way. So I built on loads of my experience from doing startup stuff and other contract roles. And I was able to sort of put together this sort of vision for the team and say, look, we could make our lives a lot easier and make things happen quicker and with less stress, and we can iterate better if we started shifting our thinking from what was essentially like a vertical way of thinking to more of a platform way of thinking. So instead of doing things differently every time we did a new sport at IMG Arena. So, sorry, for those people who don't know, IMG Arena used to be, they basically provide a lot of sports data to various gambling and sports betting sites, but they have the licenses for doing the data for people like the PGA and Major League Soccer. And, they had a lot of really awesome data coming in. And we'd done a lot of sports. We'd done 3 or 4 sports, I think, when I joined: tennis, golf, UFC, stuff like that. And we needed to do basketball, but we ended up doing it pretty much differently from the way they'd done the 3 previous ones, and each one of those was different. So when you switch between the code bases, you're like, okay, I need to rethink about how this works. And so I sort of looked at it and went, well, actually, I've seen this done before, where you have a platform where everything sort of common is shared, and then you can build small differences on top of that, and then you end up with this much more solid solution that you can iterate on really quickly with new sports much faster. That was probably a really long-winded answer to that question, but yeah, it gave us the opportunity to just do things in a slightly different way. It was really, really fun challenge. But the switch back to startup wasn't intentional. That came because I got made redundant. So IMG Arena, unfortunately, the world of sports data got very expensive and not very profitable. And IMG Arena ended up having to basically let go of nearly the whole engineering team. So we got rid of about 180 engineers over about 3 or 4 months period.
And you were a part of doing all that, weren't you? Having to do the offboarding.
Yeah. So I had a team of 24, I think. A couple of them ended up staying and sort of keeping the lights on and getting ready for the transition to the next company that came along and bought them. But I was involved with, unfortunately, having to follow the whole consultation process. I actually put myself forward as an employee rep so that I could actually be in with the weeds of understanding exactly what was going on, so that whatever happened to my team, I could at least communicate to them exactly what was happening when it was going to happen. But yeah, that was a total different challenge. I've never come across that in my career. So, it was a whole new thing to deal with.
Was there any point in your career where you thought you knew what you wanted to be? Like, I assume you didn't set out to be a CTO when you became a UX designer or
I would say, like, I didn't have a grand plan. Like, I didn't come out of university and go, right, in the next decade, I want to have done this, and therefore I can go on and become a CTO. I think quite often it's been a case of seeing someone doing something that I'm interested in and going, oh, I wonder what it's like to do that job. Like, I've had some really great managers. I had this guy called Neville Kite, who was my boss when I was at Snow Valley just after uni. One of the best people managers I've ever worked with, really lovely guy. And I remember thinking, I wonder what it's like to be a development manager. And then as I got further in my career, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be a development manager, I've seen some people I've worked with that I could like to model myself on. So I didn't really ever go, I want to be a CTO, but every time I saw somebody that was doing something interesting in a really nice way, I was like, oh, I wonder what it's like to do that job. And I think CTO kind of landed in my lap more than anything else. I actively go out and look for a CTO role. When I left IMG, I was looking for head of engineering roles and VP of engineering roles in smaller companies. And this one came along and I was like, well, it's an opportunity to go from 0 to 1 again. I love doing that. It placed a lot of my strengths around the UX side and the development side and all of the other stuff that has to go around it. And then I got to learn about stuff like compliance. I'd never done healthcare compliance before. And that was a whole, the song from Aladdin, A Whole New World kind of, it's a whole different part of my day. You know?
I had a different song in mind, but
yeah, there's a few others. I think a couple of Rage Against the Machine probably come in there as well.
Into Sandman or something. So let's tie a few things together there. You've mentioned which and to try and bring it into one of the hot topics of right now. So how does AI in all its forms, and obviously agentic coding is the one that's probably most relevant to what we're doing, but how does AI change the role of a leader of engineers? But also, how does it change? Particularly, we've talked a lot about tech, right? And I think we could talk for hours on the tech, but I'm really interested in how it changes the role of leadership of people as opposed to leadership of technology. So what are your thoughts there?
I think the way I kind of look at AI is it's a force multiplier. Now that can be for good, or it can be for evil. I mean, if you put AI into a world where you've not got any guardrails in place and you don't have good system fundamentals in place around your development processes and stuff like that, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot 10 times quicker than you used to and probably make a hell of a mess. You see all these stories about people vibe coding stuff and it exposes API secrets and all sorts to the world. I think for me, like getting people on board with that way of thinking is a key part of that. I think if you work in an environment where everybody trusts each other and, PRs are just a thing that people glance at just to go, yeah, you didn't do anything stupid, let's go. Then I think you've probably already got a lot of those guardrails in place. You've already got that trust in the people that we're working with. And then it becomes about, okay, how do we set some standards of how we want to do this? Because if everybody's off doing their thing and reading their blog and one person's using Claude and one's using ChatGPT and one using Gemini and what have you, you can end up with an absolute mess of a code base or code bases or process or people taking down production systems or what have you.
As we saw the other day.
Yeah, you can sit with your team and say, right, how do we do this in a way that makes sense to everybody? One of the things we've done with our team is I've worked with one of our senior engineers about building a shared library of skills and sort of learnings as we've gone, like, okay, hey, did anybody notice that Claude does this when you give it this kind of prompt? Right. How do we catch it and stop it from doing that? We use a lot of TDD for Claude, that sort of thing, but that comes from the people. Again, it comes back to the people management. It's like if we worked with a bunch of engineers that didn't understand TDD, they wouldn't know to give Claude that instruction and know that would make their lives better.
Exactly.
So I think computing and engineering is such a wide field. You get such a variation of the way people do things. Even now, like we've got best practices, but not everybody sees them as best practices. And some people don't even know about them as best practices. And you go and work in places and you're like, oh, it takes us 6 months to do a release because it needs to go through 4 rounds of QA and, sign off. And even then, once it's into the UAT environment, no one's allowed to touch it for a month to make sure it doesn't fall over. And you look at those environments and you go, yeah, you don't want to introduce AI into that world. That's not going to make your life better unless you're working out how to make how to solve problems with it that are smaller rather than just letting people loose with it.
I think you touched on this, what I think is the secret. The idea that we replace humans with machines in this regard is misguided at best in my book. But the idea that we augment human capabilities with the capabilities of machines, and we have this, I don't know if you know anything about computer chess, but this is actually, I'm led to believe, I'm not a chess player, but I'm led to believe this is sort of increasingly not true, which sort of invalidates the story a little bit. But let me go with the idealized version of the story. Gary Kasparov and Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov in '96 or whenever it was, right back in the, and kind of people declared chess was over. But chess has gone from strength to strength, and Magnus Carlsen these days is kind of maybe not a household name, right? But he's pretty well known, bit of a superhero. But machines just routinely destroy humans in chess, right? Like there's no competition. They're so far ahead of humans. However, for a while, at least, and it's still a bit of a wash, the best chess playing opponent was what was called a Centaur chess player, which was a human working with a machine, right? And so human, whatever, machine beat, and machine is a bit boring, right? So who cares? But a human and a machine was basically unbeatable from any other
against a machine.
Yeah, a human and machine would beat a machine on its own, right? Now, I was talking about this with someone. They recently said, no, the chess computing, just because of the increasing computing power, it's not quite solved, in the sense that all answers are known, but it's sort of we're getting to the point where it's kind of it's a wash. But if you take something a bit bigger search space like Go, right? So Lee Sedol was beaten by AlphaGo, and that was thought never to be possible that a machine would beat a human, but it happened. And the same thing applies: a human and a machine working together are better than the machine on its own. And I think this, for me, seems logical, but it seems to elude some people. And so that thinking applied to what we do as software engineers is, I'm not replacing the engineers. What I'm doing is I'm giving them a tool, and there's an environment with which to use that tool. And you're absolutely right. If you point, it's a big gun, right? If you point it in the wrong direction, not only are you going to hurt yourself, you probably hurt people around you. But properly mounted with the right controls, these things are phenomenally productive when used in the right way.
Yeah, if you go back, like, God, I do sound like a bit of an old fart these days, but if you go back to when people started getting access to the internet at work.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was in my
I remember that.
days,
Yeah.
When I first started working in an office, no one had external email. You had internal email where you can send stuff inside the company, but you can send outside of the company. And you definitely did not have internet access, because it would just be tragic.
Yeah.
As they started introducing people's ability to use the internet, which I guess is the last massive technology shift we saw before AI, they had to put these guardrails around. Like, I can remember as a system consultant, I used to go in and put Mimecast servers in, which would sit as a proxy and watch people's internet behavior. And then you'd suddenly get hauled in front of the boss for looking at stuff they shouldn't have been doing at work. It's kind of like that. People will naturally drift off into their own way of doing things if you don't give them those useful guardrails, not necessarily like massive restrictions, but like, look, the safe way we're going to head is this. And I think that's the challenge for technology leaders, is how do we come up with that without sounding like naysayers? Like, how do we use it to enable parts of the business, even people that aren't engineers, to be able to use AI really, really productively in their roles?
The thing that I find most frustrating about the debate here is that there are these two extremes. Like, we live in this crazy polarized world, and it seems to permeate everything we do. And if you go to Hacker News, there's these two extreme points of view on agentic coding. On one side, you've got complete, like, this is idiotic, never work, I can't see why, blah, blah, blah. Every third comment is, this is nonsense, right? And then on the other side, you've got equal breathless hyperbole from people saying, I just push enter all day and drink pina coladas, right? Both of those things are completely insane. Are completely and utterly insane. And I mean, we mentioned this once before, I think in one of the previous podcasts, James, that someone made the analogy, said, imagine being a carpenter, right? And throwing your manual chisel and your manual saw on the floor and leaving the room in disgust when someone turned up with an angle, with a bandsaw, a motorized bandsaw, because that's kind of that's kind of the response, right? And then equally, imagine going, I've got the bandsaw and now I'm hammering nails in with the bandsaw, right? Like, that's equally stupid. And I've heard very few people who, there is a small number of people, and growing actually, but in this middle ground, which is, these things are super interesting, they're super powerful, but they're also super dangerous. And so now we need some protocols. We need to develop protocols of use. I'm glad to see that starting to happen. And, people I talk to who I value their opinion, they've come to the same conclusion, right? That these things need protocols of use.
Yeah, and I think there's still early days, right? Like, this is so
2
new.
years.
This is so
2
new.
years.
Yeah, for businesses to take it on, it's even the effect it has on their employees as well, because of the cognitive separation you have from the problem you're solving. Like, there's going to be a loss of knowledge. There's going to be a loss of understanding of how systems work, because people are like, oh, I don't know, Claude did it for me.
But do you know how an assembler works?
How assembler works?
Yeah.
As in assembly language or assembler?
Yeah. Like,
right, okay.
or do you know how a linker works?
I remember seeing it a very long time ago, but no, I've not got the detail.
Yeah. Do you know how to and I'll just let me take it away from software. Do you know how to calculate a spline curve?
I haven't done that kind of maths for about 30 years. But
no, neither have I.
I used to be able to.
But every time you go in and draw a curve, even in PowerPoint, or let alone Illustrator, there's a bunch of smart maths there. Have you ever done selective cut? Like the smart cut, right? There's a whole bunch of clever diffusion going on, and all that stuff. And I go, well, I don't know how that works, right? I suspect if I sat down with someone who did know how it worked, and we got a whiteboard, and I had a week, right, and they could explain the background, I could probably understand it. But do I need it to do my day to day? No, all right. Now, I feel somewhat the same way with this stuff. I know how to program. And so when Claude's writing code at 20 times or 100 times the speed that I can write the code at, I have to wind it back a little bit so that it's at least at the speed that I can read, right? But I can't write it as fast as I can read it, right? And I'd be mad not to take advantage of that capability.
And even then, even when you are reading it, you don't have the full context of being able to understand how all of the various parts fit together. You're only reading the bit that's in front of you.
Yeah,
right?
I think this is super interesting. So I saw this thing the other day where a guy wrote, it was actually one of the Elixir guys, but he wrote this thing which was hooked into the pull request. And what it did was when you did a pull request, before it would submit the pull request, it gave you like a 10-question quiz on, like it used the LLM to write the quiz on the code that was being checked in, and you had to sort of answer it. You had to get 80% of the questions right on the check-in, and it takes an extra 2 minutes, right, on a pull request. But it was a absolute genius idea, yeah, and particularly for junior programmers, right, who don't necessarily have may not know what questions to ask.
Yeah, and also like they don't understand what coverage they need and stuff. I know when LLMs start being really used for code at the end of last year, people were saying don't let them write tests, because they're invariably going to miss a lot of the things that you need to know about how the product should be used. And then that's changed. Like, it's been a real shift over the last 6 months of people going, oh, actually, no, I just let it write all my tests, And I think you're right. We're going to start losing that need for, I know how my engine works in my car when I turn my key.
Yeah.
Right. Like I used to be able to change the spark plugs in the car. I would not touch anything under the bonnet of my car now other than put oil and water in it. That's the complexity when you take the air filter off blows my mind. And it's still just a straightforward combustion engine really under there, but there's the amount of electronics that are around it are relatively scary. And I am still old school, so I'm still using a petrol driven car, but
and always sealed, like little sealed tabs on it, right? So if you undo it, they know you've stuck
your warranty is
around with it. Yeah.
But I think we will get to a place where we are driving the car, we're not needing to be the mechanic, but we still need to know which direction we're pointing it in and kind of the limitations of the constraints we're working within. So it's going to be it feels like a lot of engineering these days is becoming all about steering the ship rather than necessarily filling the coal into the boilers,
Yeah, or machining the gasket, right, of the steam engine. Does the captain of a supertanker need to be able to machine a gasket, in the piston, right? No, but does he or she need to go, oh, if I push this button and this thrust applies, and that's too much, you know what I mean, right? Like, so I think that the tendency, so actually what's really interesting, type 1 and type 2 thinking, like instinct and then reflection, from Kahneman. I saw this really good paper the other day of type 3 thinking, which is cognitive offload.
Okay.
Right. And so cognitive offload is what you're describing. And cognitive offload has advantages in the sense that, I can rely on this thing to do this thinking for me so I can do it more quickly. But in the same way that type 1 thinking has positives and negatives, And type 2 has positive and negative. Type 3 has positive and negatives as well, right? And this cognitive offload idea is that I have a much shallower understanding of what I've done, even though I can move more quickly.
Yeah, I was reading, so James Stanier, I don't know if I got his name right there. The guy who's written a lot of executive leadership books for tech leaders. He has a really good newsletter, and he was talking about his CTO daily driver that he has. So he's written a skill for Claude that goes and summarizes his day for him and says, look, these are some of the things you need to prioritize. It's a really fascinating way of looking at using these sort of tools to, like you say, cognitive offload and say, look, it's like the old thing about Steve Jobs wearing the same trainers and jeans and t-shirt every day, right? It was because he didn't have to think about that thing every day.
Yeah.
But it's like this tool of being able to then say, okay, based on, and I think it prompts him to give it feedback during the day and say, like, how did a meeting go? And what was the summary of the end of the day? And then it knows what the next priorities are. So
that's actually really interesting. I was chatting to someone. She had this really cool thing that she would do. She would get in the car, and instead of listening to podcasts, she would put ChatGPT on audio mode, and she would pick a topic, and they would just like rubber duck a topic. And I thought, that's a super interesting idea, right? Like that's, it's hard to argue that that's not a beneficial thing to do. I go for a walk and have a chat with the machine about a topic. I thought that was a fascinating.
Have you used Whisper, Les?
No, I've not tried it actually.
It's WHISPR. I use it now and I couldn't go back. Like it's probably the best tool that I use out of anything at the moment.
Really?
Oh, Claude, yeah.
This is a real generational split here. I've noticed this shift in the comms, like the comms hygiene of teenagers, say 20-somethings and 30, maybe into their 30s, and people from my generation. The de rigueur thing to do now is not to ring them, right? Because that's old, like that's something my parents would do. Not to text message, because that's something I would do, but to leave a voice note, right? And then the person on the other end picks up the voice note, and I just find that very strange. I don't know why, but I just find it very strange. And I have the same allergy to Whisper. Like I find talking to the machine really weird. It doesn't work for me at all.
I'm the same as you. I find it really challenging to talk into my phone to say my thoughts. Like I started using Otter AI years ago, before Gen AI suddenly became this huge thing, but I used to use it for meeting notes and stuff like that, and it was really useful. Right. But whenever I tried to say my thoughts, I just end up with like 300 words of gibberish because I hadn't formed the thoughts.
But now AI can form those thoughts. That's the thing. Like it's impressive. I would suggest trying it.
Okay. Not so much what it can do. It's what I'm 100% with you, Les. The way I think out of my head, right? And I'm aphantasic, so I can't form images in my brain inside my head anyway. I have no mind's eye. But so put that aside. I have to write stuff to think about it, right? And so talking doesn't do that. Like if I'm talking to another person, that's a different thing. I'm sort of chatting away, but I can't talk to something I just can't do it. I don't know why.
Well, maybe it's not for you. I have heard though that like writing gives your brain time to think, so you can actually write something that you structure. Whereas talking, obviously, you talk so much faster. But yeah, for the stuff I do, for sending emails or brainstorming or getting ideas out, like it is just so much better. I will even now Whisper's so good that I'll do websites, I'll name files, I'll do everything on there. Like I hardly type anymore.
Yeah. I fully appreciate that I'm on the wrong side of this argument. Like I fully see that because everyone is doing what you're doing now. You see people walking down the street talking into their phone and they're not on the phone because it's just a one-way thing. And it's instead of text messaging, it's voice messaging. Weird. That's where we are.
Well, I think I would like to go into a lot more, but I appreciate we are already at an hour. So, I think maybe we can get you back on, Les, down the track, and we can talk a little bit more about how the current project's going at Practice Toolkit. But yeah, I want to say thank you so much for coming on. We'll put some notes there on what we discussed today, and obviously if anyone wants to find you, to reach out and say anything. We actually had a recent guest send us a message the other day of someone random that reached out to them and thanked them for their episode, and it was quite nice to see. So there are people out there listening, and they do appreciate it. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I think it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, I genuinely could talk to you guys for another couple of hours. It's been really good fun. Thank you.
No, I agree. It's been great. And just as a metric for how good the conversation was, I've broken the record for show notes entries while we've been talking here. So I've got 10. I've never had 10 show notes entries before. So that's a good sign that we're having a good chat.
I do sometimes when I go to edit the podcast, I go to get all the show notes because I use obviously AI to find out what we need to put in it. And sometimes I'm like, I don't think we need to put that one in now. Now I reflect on it, but I will try and put everything that we've discussed today.
I've got it all here, everything we've spoken about.
Okay. Right. They'll be all in there. You can find them.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Thanks, Les. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Les. Great to chat.